Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy, and this week we're going to be talking about writing romance. So we've done a few of these genre-themed weeks recently. We've already talked about how to write a thriller and how to write fantasy. So this week we're going to be talking about how to write romance. And of course, if you have genres you'd like us to talk about in the future, please feel free to drop a comment, or if you're not sure which genre your book falls under, check out our video on the ultimate guide to literary genres. So romance is one of the, if not the most popular genre. It's a genre that follows a love story with a happy ending. We're going to cover some tips for how to write romance in this video, and on Friday we're going to be talking about some popular tropes in this genre that you may or may not want to avoid in your work. So step number one for writing romance is to find your niche. Romance has many different subgenres, and these subgenres often lend to fairly distinct target audiences. Now, there are a ton of romance subgenres and subgenres within subgenres, but some popular ones that you might encounter or be writing yourself are things like historical, paranormal, contemporary, fantasy, and honestly, so many more. If you can think of a genre, there's probably a romance subgenre that pairs along with it, such as romantic thriller, romantic mystery, historical, or fantasy like we just talked about. If you're worried that your idea doesn't fit kind of the typical idea of what a romance novel is, look into the different subgenres. It's very likely that there is a home for your book in the genre, which is kind of just like a really huge tree with so many different branches. This is also, of course, super important for knowing your target audience going forward. Number two, set the stage. Romance is an escapist genre, which means you want it to be immersive. Therefore, you want to create a setting that really draws the reader in so they can fully immerse themselves in the story. Choose a distinct setting for your book. Many contemporary romances have kind of small, cozy settings like a seaside village or a college campus, with internal compact settings within them. So for example, a diner, a cafe, or a bookstore where people tend to hang out and your characters are likely to run into each other. Other subgenres have grander settings, but it's still important to focus on making the setting immersive. So make it specific. Don't let the setting just be a vague backdrop. Think of it as kind of a character of its own. It has its own personality, its own unique charm, and try to give it a distinct look. I'll leave a couple videos we've done on setting and on setting the scene in the description to help you with this aspect. Step number three is, of course, to create your leading couple. Since a romance novel is all about watching the characters fall in love with each other, you need to have two strong, interesting lead characters that the reader can invest in, so that the reader is by extension interested in their relationship. It's very hard, if not maybe impossible, to get someone invested in a romance when they're not invested in either of the characters. If you think about your favorite fictional couples from movies, TV shows, books, whatever, the love stories that really had you the most invested were probably the ones where you were already invested in each character individually. So let's start with the love interest. There are romance novels that have a dual point of view, but we're kind of going to be using the terms love interest and protagonist under the assumption that one character is the main character or the narrating character. Now, of course, the love interest is stereotypically a very strong, muscular, emotionally aloof man with a dark past, but this character can be whoever you want them to be. They don't have to fit under that stereotype. What's really important is for this character to have emotional depth and the capacity for vulnerability with the protagonist in order to develop an emotional bond between them and the main character that feels genuine to the reader. This usually means giving the character an interesting and compelling past. Yes, this past is often shrouded in some kind of mystery at first, but that kind of mystery surrounding the character can be very compelling. It's common for the love interest to even have a tragic past, something they need to work through, and usually the protagonist is the one who's able to kind of break through that shell. On the flip side, we have the main character, or the protagonist. While the love interest usually needs help with the main character to deal with their internal problems, you'll often see the protagonist needing the love interest's help to deal with an external problem. Say the main character moves to a new town and they don't have a job, and the love interest owns a bookstore, and so they give them a job in their bookstore. Something like that. Protagonists are definitely trending more assertive these days, whereas in the past, very kind of bland, emotionally submissive female characters were definitely the norm in this genre, but that trend is definitely kind of fading away. In the past, the idea was that the main character of a romance novel should be bland enough that any reader can kind of insert themselves into the story. This technique, of course, you'll still find, but it's not as popular as it used to be. Now, more defined characters with bolder, clearer personalities are rising to the forefront. Personally, I think that this is stronger writing. The idea that anyone can relate to a bland protagonist is a bit faulty in my opinion, since it's very hard to relate to a character who is underdeveloped because they just don't feel like a person. So make your lead an interesting and specific character. They can have whatever qualities you want to give them, of course. Of course, I said this before, but I'll reiterate it. It's very hard for the reader to invest in a romance where they're not invested in the characters as individuals. So both of them should be complex and interesting. I'll leave some videos on character development in the description so you can really work on creating both your main characters to be as interesting and developed as possible. Step number 4, see if you want to integrate any tried and true tropes. We'll talk more about a couple specific tropes in the genre on Friday. Tropes are kind of an integral part of the romance genre, and they don't have to be a bad thing. Although you want to avoid cliches, tropes on their own do not necessarily have to be bad. Although subverting them is of course really exciting, there are so many romance novels out there where the trope is kind of the backbone of the story, such as friends to lovers, enemies to lovers. We've got a whole post on romance tropes that I'll leave a link to in the description. But as you can see, these tropes are almost like plot lines of their own, and a lot of romance novels kind of categorize themselves based on kind of the core trope that they follow. Of course, you want to put your own spin on any tropes you use, but readers love these tropes for a reason, and there's no reason why you have to feel like just because something is a trope, it's a bad thing that you can't go anywhere near. Step number 5, writing intimacy. It's very hard to talk about the romance genre without talking about writing sex scenes or physical intimacy in some way. Now, of course, some people might equate R-rated content with the romance genre, but this isn't necessarily true, and in fact it depends a lot on the subgenre you're writing in. Some genres, like urban fantasy, paranormal, or obviously erotica, tend to have more R-rated content, but others, like historical or young adult, also obviously, might not have any sex at all, or it might be very minimal or written in a fade to black way. So look at how sex scenes or physical intimacy is handled in the subgenre you're writing in, because it really does vary a lot, subgenre to subgenre. But also keep in mind that as a writer, it's okay to have your personal boundaries of what you're comfortable or not comfortable writing. But also, don't psych yourself out too much. A lot of people will say that sex scenes are the hardest thing to write, but really they've got the same principles as any other scene, like use of good character work. If you find them intimidating to write, I think it's useful to try and write the entire scene in just one sitting and come back and revise it later, so you don't psych yourself out thinking that you're writing it in a way that's bad or cringy. Just get it all out in one sitting. Step number 6, don't neglect your secondary characters. Because romance is often so focused on the main couple, it can be easy to kind of neglect the side characters. But they're actually really important so that the world feels fleshed out and believable. We don't just have one core person in our life. Our lives are full of many different people, friends and family. And so it doesn't feel realistic if a love interest enters the scene and they're now the only person the main character ever interacts with. You don't want it to feel like some weird reality where there are 2 developed characters and everyone else is a cardboard cutout, or just doesn't seem to exist. Side characters really do bring life to the story, and they can help you develop your protagonist and your love interest by giving them other people to interact with. Best friends in particular are often very important characters in romance because they offer advice, pep talks, and can act as a foil to the protagonist. However, I will note one common pitfall, and that's making the side characters more interesting than the main couple. This is actually a fairly easy trap to fall into in any genre, really, not exclusive to romance. I think the reason that this happens is because protagonists have to carry the weight of the plot, so there's a bit more weight on them to have to be a serious character, whereas side characters, especially like a best friend character, it's really easy to make them really quirky and fun because they're not carrying the weight of the internal conflict. What you don't want to do is make a side character so interesting and fun that the main character looks bland in comparison. Also, it's good to remember that it's very common in romance for the side characters to turn into the main characters in a spin-off or a sequel. So intrigue the reader in your side characters so they'll want to come back for the next installment when that character inevitably gets their own story. And finally, step 7 is to give your main couple a happy ending. The romance genre does essentially promise a happy ending. There is a bit of debate out there, but the general consensus is that for a book to be classified as a romance, it does need to end with the main couple ending up together. If you have a romance with a tragic ending where the couple doesn't end up together, that's usually considered something like a romantic drama, not just a pure romance. Pretty much all readers of romance will go into your book expecting for the couple to end up together, since that is a core convention of this genre. The end should also tie up as many loose plot threads as possible, since if there are a lot of unanswered questions, it can kind of break the immersion or the satisfaction of the ending. Of course, if you're setting up for, say, a spin-off or a sequel with another character, it's great to set up the potential for a storyline there while still wrapping up the conflict as it pertains to your main couple. If you want to learn more about how to write a romance novel, we've got an entire course on this topic, so I will leave a link to that in the description. If you've ever written a romance novel, I would love to hear about it in the comments. I'll admit it's not my genre in particular, so if you have any personal experiences writing or publishing in this genre, I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.